into another live Patriots Q A. I'm Sierra Goodwill here with Evan Lazar. As we get going, feel free to drop your questions in the live chat. We have a couple from Twitter that we can start off with. I think the most pertinent question you've gotten so far on Twitter today, Evan, is whether or not you miss going to the movies.
Oh, absolutely. I love the movies. I miss going to the movies, get a bunch of crunch, get some popcorn. I don't do soda at the movies because then I'll have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the movie. Big kind of, hiccup for me. So I usually love going to the movies. So I do really miss it. And I wish that there was something that we could go see.
I know. I wish times would just change back to the way we were, but we're inching closer and closer. So let's get to some Patriots questions. First off, on Twitter, we got a question. If the Patriots decided to sign Snacks Harrison or Daniels at some point, can they play nose tackle and end in a 3-4, or are they limited to one position?
Yeah, it's Mike Daniels, formerly of the Green Bay Packers, that the question is about. And Daniels is a little bit more versatile, I think, to play a little bit more towards the outside. But I think both of those guys are either straight up nose tackles or A or B gap defenders, or 1 or 3 technique players. They're not really guys that I picture going all the way out to a 5 technique and playing over a tackle or something like that, especially for Snacks Harrison. I think Mike Daniels has a little bit more athleticism, a little bit more of an ability to do that in that sort of role. He's been in predominantly more of a 3-4 system with Mike Pettin there in Green Bay. So he does have some experience in that type of system, although he's more been a kind of a one-gapping guy on the backside. So be interesting to see if they do go ahead and add another big body. I wrote about that last week, that maybe they are one run stuffer short on the defensive line right now for the type of scheme that they want to run.
And one more question here from Twitter before we switch over to live chat. Drop all your questions in there and we'll be sure to get to them live on air. We have a question about sacks. They said, I know Bill Belichick isn't in for stats, but who do you think will lead the Patriots in sacks this season?
Yeah, I mean, Bill Belichick, I think, is not necessarily one for stats, but he's also one for pressures over sacks. He just wants to disrupt the quarterback, most importantly, move him off his spot, get his brain kind of circulating up there, and not really get too much into who's getting the sack or who's finishing the play. But in terms of who's going to lead the team in sacks, that's a good question, because they don't have one guy that's like an obvious answer because they take such a team approach to it. But I'm going to take one that's might be a little bit of a surprise to somebody and go with Chase Winovich. And just looking at the way that he's going to have an uptick in snaps with Kyle Van Noy gone, if he replaces Van Noy a little bit in that role in some of their pass rushing fronts, I think that Winovich, who had 5.5 sacks last year, could see a little bit of uptick in statistical production.
Another question here from Leon. Will N'Keal Harry be a number 1 wide receiver in your opinion? I know we've talked about, it's hard to imagine him making so much of a jump that he overtakes Julian Edelman, who's been obviously number 1 wide out here for quite some time. But do you see him eventually getting there?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that if he's going to be a number 1 wideout, then he is going to have to be more productive on the outside, on the boundary, working on his route releases, getting the timing of his routes down, because I just don't really see him blossoming into that in his current state, where most of his production is coming off of scheme touches or creative ways to get the ball in his hands. He's going to have to become a more proficient route runner. And do I think he can get there? I do, because I look at his college days, and yeah, it's a completely different game, the college game, to the NFL, especially in the Pac-12, and the way defenses defend players with a lot of zone in the college game. But I do think that he can take that leap, but it's really going to come down to what he does with his technique, with his route running prowess, for him to be able to be a little bit more consistent, winning one-on-one matchups on his own without a lot of help from the scheme. So a little bit better usage, I think, this year, and also a little bit improved route running. I don't know, really what we want to call a number 1 receiver, but I kind of understand the question more so as like a guy that demands attention, right? That demands coverage, that demands sort of a game plan against him every single week. And I could see N'Keal Harry blossoming into that sort of guy eventually.
Our next question's about your opinion on Byron Cowart. I know you think he could be in for a breakout season.
Yeah, so I think Byron Cowart is one of those guys on that defensive line that, with some of the shuffling that they've had up front, that could be up for a little bit more playing time in his second season. Now, basically, the MO on Cowart is that really he was a pass rush specialist at Maryland, and he came in as a guy that's a much better pass rusher than a run defender. In the running game, his power does show up at times, but he plays a little bit too high. He doesn't really understand how to use his hands yet, and he's kind of just out there banging bodies. So I think there is some kind of, development needed in that sort of regard. But in terms of pass rushing, I think this guy can be a really effective pass rusher right away. And we saw in the preseason some of that power at the point of attack, the ability to bull rush and push the pocket from the interior. He really gets off the ball and unloads a really mean punch into these tackles and guards. So I think that's really where he's going to have to kind of, get the most out of his game from, is being able to do those sort of things. But if he can develop as a run defender, then there is a spot open on that defensive line for him to take.
Jonathan also wants to know what you think about Will Hastings. There's been a lot of buzz about these undrafted free agent wide receivers. First, all the attention was on Jeff Thomas. Sean Riley was getting a little love. Will Hastings, what do you think about him?
Well, I think that sometimes we get a little bit too excited about these guys, quite frankly. Okay. I think Will Hastings is a nice player, and certainly the chemistry that he had with Jared Stidham from his Auburn days, specifically in that 2017 season where Stidham also played a much better, and so did Hastings. It's enticing, right? It's exciting to see two guys that clearly had a connection on the field already work together again here. But I think the biggest thing with Hastings, he does add a little bit more of a vertical element from the slot. He can get deep on the defense a little bit, and he has some speed, but his frame is extremely small and extremely brittle. He's got very short arms, so he doesn't have a huge catch radius, and he doesn't play on special teams. So that's going to be the biggest thing for him. He's not a return guy. He's not going to return punts or kickoffs, or he doesn't really have much experience doing that. So he's going to have to cover kicks in some way to get on the team, because he's not going to make the team as just a slot receiver.
The next question is about one NFL insider, Peter King's most recent power rankings. He came out with them on Monday, and he slotted the New England Patriots at number 21. And not only did he do that, he had the Patriots at third in the AFC East, behind both the Buffalo Bills and the Miami Dolphins. What are your reactions to that?
Well, all due respect to Peter King, but I think that that's bogus, personally. The third in the AFC East is not giving Bill Belichick any sort of credit for being a good head coach or anything like that. I think the biggest thing with the Patriots, though, is that they are very difficult to peg right now. Are they going to be a team that's going to surprise people? They could easily surprise, or they could go 6-10, and I don't think anybody would be surprised, right? If they went either direction of that. So I understand sort of being in the middle on them, but I don't understand putting them at third in the AFC East. I think that that's a little bit premature.
And another question here about Rex Burkhead, whether or not you think he's at risk of getting cut this offseason, probably mostly in part due to his high cap hit.
Yeah, he's got that high cap hit. They can save some money by cutting him, and they can really kind of free up some space that they might need during the season by making a move like that. But all I know is that the coaching staff absolutely loves Rex Burkhead, and I think it's going to take a lot for him to be on the outside looking in. Damien Harris in particular is going to have to take a really big leap. Also in the kicking game as well, Damien Harris, Rex Burkhead had a huge role last year on special teams along with his role on offense. So someone's going to have to take those snaps and the offensive snaps, which is part of that equation when you start to, put together the 53-man roster. Even though special teams isn't something that we all think about too often, it is part of that equation for Bill Belichick. So I think that there's going to have to be a lot of things that happen for Rex Burkhead to fall out of favor with the coaching staff that much for him to be an outright cut. The other issue is that he might have a little bit of trade value if people around the league valued running backs anymore, but they don't. So I don't really see him having a huge trade value either. But if the Patriots go with more of like an outside zone running game, which I think is some people think that they might, getting kind of into that Kyle Shanahan coaching tree, if they go with more of that, then he does have a little bit more burst maybe than a guy like Sony Michel, and you do need somebody that can run in that scheme. So I do think it's interesting to look at Burkhead as one of those guys that once training camp hopefully rolls around, we're going to be talking a lot about Rex Burkhead.
We're still fielding questions about starting quarterbacks, whether or not it is going to be Jarrett Stidham or if they could maybe roll with Brian Hoyer, especially due in part to the shortened and unusual preseason and offseason here that we're now going through. I know you wouldn't be surprised if Brian Hoyer was in that starting role, at least for the first couple of weeks for the Patriots before Jarrett Stidham kind of gets his feet under him. Do you still see it that way?
Yeah, my take on this hasn't really changed. The only way that I really see Brian Hoyer having a legitimate shot at starting games for the Patriots, barring injury to Jared Stidham, is if the coronavirus really disrupts the offseason. If we don't have a big training camp or we don't have any sort of mini camp here by the end of June, and it's really a very kind of just virtual off season and virtual camp, then I could see them easing it into a little bit more with Jared Stidham. But I think that Stidham will be the starter. I really don't see why they would cut Brian Hoyer, an expense for Stidham last year, and then revert back on that and then start Hoyer over Stidham here. But at the same time, if the coronavirus gets in the way, then I could see it.
I'm going to synthesize here Ryan's question in the live chat because I do think it's interesting. He talks about player development, specifically in the wide receiver role, and how people have seen it as being an issue or concern in years past. What is your thought on Troy Brown, Joe Judge, Mick Lombardi's, all their kind of roles in the past and current with the team?
Well, I think the disappointing thing for me last year, and who am I to say how Bill Belichick should handle his coaching staff? He obviously knows a lot more about this than I do. But the disappointing part about it for me last year was that Joe Judge was dividing his attention between special teams and wide receivers when you had a lot of really young and new players at the wide receiver position that were very vital to the team's success, especially N'Keal Harry. So you have a rookie first round pick, the first time Belichick drafts the first round pick ever in his coaching tenure with the Patriots, and he decides to give it to a wide receivers coach who's never coached the position before and is splitting duties between special teams and wide receivers. That was a tough pill to swallow for me. I think that they really need to get a guy in there. Maybe Mick Lombardi is the answer. Maybe Troy Brown's the answer, that has some experience coaching that position and understands either playing or coaching wide receivers. So again, this could be Troy Brown, but I think with development with wide receivers, the key is really getting someone in there that understands the position and understands sort of the nuances of coaching that position to really move these guys along. So last year, I thought that it kind of got underreported, or the story got untold about how Joe Judge had N'Keal Harry, he had Jacoby Myers, he had Mohamed Sanu midseason, he had all these new faces, and he was there, worrying about punt team while the offense was coming off the field. It was too much, I think, for one guy to handle both of those responsibilities. Now, it did get Joe Judge a head coaching job, so maybe that part of it did succeed for him in that way. But I think the biggest thing moving forward is getting someone whose sole responsibility is coaching the wideouts.
Here's an interesting question from Leon. And it's regarding if James Devlin didn't retire, do you think that the Patriots would have drafted a more traditional tight end like Adam Trautman instead of a Dalton Keene?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly what they would have done if James Devlin didn't retire, but I do know that they really loved Dalton Keene. Not as much as they loved Devin Asiasi. They loved him a little bit more. But with Dalton Keene, I think the biggest thing, other than the versatility, is peeling back the curtain of what kind of guy they're getting in this player. And his nickname at Virginia Tech was Rambo because of the way that he worked out in the weight room, and the long hair also obviously played a role in it too. And he is just a workout warrior, a very, very tough, like nose to the grindstone, Patriot way type player. I think that they really fell in love with him in terms of his character as well as what he was bringing on the field. So I would think that they probably would stay with the two guys that they selected because they were much higher on those two guys than a lot of people even in the league, where the Patriots had Asiasi and Keene as 1-2 on their tight end board, and they got both of them. So I think they're very happy there.
And our weekly Damien Harris question, is he getting a push for the New England Patriots? I'm taking that as, is he showing improvement? Is he going to make an impact this season?
Like I said earlier with the Rex Burkhead question, I think the biggest thing with Damien Harris is making yourself valuable to the game day roster. So that's not just contributing at running back, because they have Sony Michel, they have James White, they have Rex Burkhead, they have Brandon Bolden. Getting those snaps at running back is a difficult thing to do, especially if nobody gets hurt at that position. So nobody really got hurt last year other than Burkhead. The health of that position was very, very good throughout the entire year, and it made it very difficult for Damien Harris to get on the field. When you put on top of that guys like Burkhead and Bolden have such valuable roles on special teams, you have to get on the field somehow on game day, make yourself a valuable asset to that 46-day game day roster. So getting better in the kicking game, improving at running back still, that's where Damien Harris really needs to be right now.
We have a question here about Cody Davis. Is he ready for the Patriots?
Cody Davis is sort of an untold story as well, I think, this offseason. After they traded Deron Harmon to Detroit, they signed Adrian Phillips. A lot of people are like, well, there's your Harmon replacement. But Adrian Phillips is more of that Patrick Chung type safety who's going to play in the box, play over the slot, do that sort of thing. Whereas Harmon was more of that center fielder, deep safety type. I think this is sort of the one question I have about this safety group, which is insanely deep, obviously, with 9 players already on the roster. But can they get a guy other than Devin McCourty that can play the deep middle, that can play that post safety role, so that they can unlock Devin McCourty and let him move around a little bit more like they did last season with Harmon back there? So is it going to be Kyle Duggar? Is it going to be Cody Davis? Those are the 2 guys I would say are kind of the leaders in the clubhouse for that role. And that's going to be the question is, can they take McCourty out of the deep middle and out of the deep half and let him play more closer to the line of scrimmage? Or is he going to have to be the full-time free safety next year and take away from some of Devin's versatility a little bit?
And a question about your expectations for Quincy. I'm not going to slaughter his last name on air right now.
Adebayo.
Thank you. What you expect for him in 2020?
Big-bodied receiver. I mean, I don't expect anything from him in 2020. I think it's going to be a long shot for him to make the team. But when you look at his skill set, he does have good speed. He does have good size. So he has those measurables that you like. So I look at him as more of a practice squad player and a scout team player. You go up against some of these bigger-bodied receivers that can move, that have good athleticism. Adebayo is a nice kind of comp for those types of players, for a scout team, for a practice squad, so that they can practice going up against those types of guys in the preparation during the week. I don't think that he has a real chance at making the 53.
More long-term question here. When Bill Belichick retires, who do you think replaces him? And does it come from in-house, as in a McDaniels or a Mayo?
Well, at this point, I don't think it will be Josh McDaniels unless it happens soon, which I don't anticipate it happening. I think McDaniels is, unless the league has completely soured on him, which is not sort of my understanding of it, within the next year or 2, I would assume that McDaniels leaves for a head coaching job elsewhere. I think that writing has sort of been on the wall for a couple of years now, and McDaniels is sort of waiting for that perfect kind of opportunity. Green Bay was really the one that he wanted. It went to Matt LaFleur. So he's kind of looking back at the drawing board now to find the next spot. So I would actually also not sleep on Steve Belichick. I think that's a big possibility as well, as Bill continues to groom his son a little bit here. Steve was basically the defensive coordinator last year, calling plays with the headset, with the play sheet. So I wouldn't be shocked if it's either Mayo or Steve Belichick. I think McDaniels, at least for now, is looking like on the outside looking in for this role.
We'll be taking a few more questions, so drop them in your live chat as they come along. This one's been a debate among a lot of people around the team for a long time, and that's whether or not Julian Edelman is going to get a gold jacket, and he also lumps in Devin McCourty. What's your opinion?
Are we talking gold jacket or red jacket? Because they're two different
Question's
things.
Gold.
Okay, the gold jacket is the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Right.
I think that's going to be a long shot for both guys, but I do think Julian is probably a little bit more of a long shot than people would like to hear. Patriots fans would like to hear. The regular season statistics are just too far off. There's really no comp. I mean, you can go back to the 70s with guys like Lynn Swann and stuff like that, but that's a completely different era of football. So really from this modern era of football, there's no real comp for Edelman to get him into the Hall of Fame. Even with his postseason resume, it can't all be about the postseason resume. You have to have some sort of a regular season longevity. No Pro Bowls, no All-Pro nods, only a couple 1,000-yard seasons to his name. It's just not a lot to work with there. As great as of a Patriot as he has been, as great of a pro as he has been, it's just a long shot, I think, for the Hall of Fame. As far as Devin McCourty goes, I thought it would be a long shot for him as well. I still think it is a little bit of a long shot, but you look at some of the more recent guys, like a Brian Dawkins, for example, he gets into the Hall of Fame, and I think Devin fits a little bit more in that Dawkins camp, not necessarily in the way that they play, but just in terms of their resumes. I think that Devin has as much of an impressive, if not more impressive, resume than somebody like a Brian Dawkins. He does have some All-Pro nods and some Pro Bowls and some seasons where he led the league in interceptions, and he's got the 3 Super Bowl rings. So I think that there's definitely a chance for Devin, believe it or not, over Julian Edelman.
Interesting take. And here's another question. Is Dan Vitale and Dalton Keene redundant if Keene can play fullback? And is Jakob Johnson the leader in the clubhouse to replace Devlin at the fullback position?
This is a question that I've actually been thinking about a little bit too, is do they necessarily need to keep all these fullbacks, right? They got 3 technical H-back fullback types on the roster with those 3 guys that you just mentioned, Sierra. So do they really need all of them? I think the question will be answered quickly in the preseason in terms of how much Dalton Keene is really picking up the offense and how quickly he's absorbing information. I think that if he can get up to speed quickly and he can show that he can kind of play a bigger role as a rookie than maybe some other rookies have in the past at that position, then we could see him kind of have that role locked up and make a Vitale or make a Jakob Johnson expendable. I would keep Jakob Johnson around though, just because he is sort of more that battering ram type, like a James Devlin. Whereas I think Keene and Vitale more bring that pass catching athleticism versatility element to that position. They might not necessarily bring that mean streak and that heavy hitting to that spot. So I'd like to see them hold on to Jakob Johnson and Keene. I think that Vitale is a guy that I really like, a great personality, great player, great pickup, but I'm not necessarily sure that there's a roster spot for him when it all kind of shakes itself out here.
And our last question today, who, in your opinion, leads the Patriots in receptions and yards at tight end this season?
At tight end, I think it's going to be Asiasi. I think that when you look at his skill set, you look at the routes that he likes to run, you look at the type of things that he did with the ball in his hands as well at UCLA. I think he has the ability to really make an immediate impact. I think Keene will have a little bit more of a transition. There might be some easier kind of scheme touches that they can put in the offense right away for Keene, where he might get some more manufactured touches in a guy like Asiasi, where they're throwing him the ball behind the line of scrimmage or like on a fullback screen or something like that, where he might get the ball in his hands a little bit more early on. But I think Asiasi is the more talented right now route runner, downfield route runner, certainly, and just kind of receiving pass catching options. So I'd look for Asiasi to be a pretty quick star here in New England's offense.
Well, thanks for tuning in to another Patriots Live Q&A. If we didn't get to your question today, don't worry. We'll be back here same time, same place at 1 p.m. Eastern on Friday. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel at Patriots Press Pass so you never miss a live stream or a video that we put out pretty much on a daily basis. Again, every Tuesday and Friday, we're live here